So welcome to our workshop. We have been blessed to have some amazing, let me turn this music off, amazing guest writers. I think y'all would agree. And I want to start as we always start to saying, everyone is welcome, no matter who you are, no matter your identity or identities. This is a safe space, a non-judgmental space. It's a space of love and peace and introverts. That's what we are. Have a mantra, hashtag I am a writer. I am a writer. I am a writer. And I'm really every session, I think y'all would agree, is really powerful. I'm really excited about tonight. Mr. Rodriguez, we're going to come to you shortly, but just talking about emotional memory. I mean, my gosh, there's going to be I have a lot of questions for you about that. But let's start with, as we always do. I am not home. I'm upstate New York today, so that's why my wall is blank. Y'all know that I have art on my walls back home, but I still got my workout in, and I rushed here, and I was off camera too because I had to eat some fruit real quick because I'm hungry right now. But no matter what your day is, let's just take a moment, as we always say, to please just close our eyes, if you don't mind. Just breathe in through the nose, slowly breathe out through the mouth. Just positive energy in, toxic energy out. It's important for us to pause periodically, just to slow down. Do it on your own for a few seconds. Just breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, just thinking positive energies. Everyone's welcome. All the folks who've been here before, all the new folks. We certainly welcome our guest writer, the legendary Louis J. Rodriguez. Just breathe, y'all. Just breathe. I hope that folks are writing, putting things down on paper. Or snoring, whatever you're doing. You know what I'm saying? It sounded like a snore. I was like, word.
No, that's the car. I'm in the car.
I'm sorry. Keep breathing, please. I know we got folks from all over the country, from California to the East Coast. Shout out to all of y'all, no matter what state you're in. People from overseas. We've had people from South America, from Africa, from Asia, from Europe on these calls, on these Zooms, which is beautiful. So in the spirit of unity, let's do 3 together. In through the nose on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, in. Push it out. Unmute, please, as you're breathing. Breathe in. Make some noise. Push it out. Last deep. Hold on, one more. One deep breath in together. Deep breath in. Make some noise. Push it out. You can never help but laugh. No, to be honest, some of y'all are extra with the breathing. Y'all know what I'm saying? Like, for real. Yeah, breathe. I'm gonna breathe. So welcome everyone to the writing workshop. Word, blow it out. Welcome to the workshop. We're here every Tuesday. We got today with Mr. Louis Rodriguez. We have next week with Nikki Giovanni. Then we're going to close it out with Mildred Ruiz Sapp and Steven Sapp. And then we'll be back in the spring for our next set of workshops with guest writers. And so before we get started, just also know that on the Facebook group, it's called Kevin Powell's Writing Workshop. Please join that as well. Please join that workshop. There's a lot of great information being shared there, which is beautiful. Information about publishing. And I'm glad that, I actually realized, Mr. Rodriguez, I'm going to say this when we start talking, but you're actually one of the few writers that we have out there who has not only been a best-selling author, but also has your own bookstore and literary center. So when I asked him for a link to sell his books, the link is actually his bookstore. That's gangster, y'all. That's like gangster. Seriously. That's gangster. So, and I mean gangster in all the positive way you can think about it. It's beautiful. But let's, before we get started, any thoughts about the last workshop we had, the last session? What are y'all working on? What's on your hearts? What's on your minds? Any questions at all? Any thoughts? Raise your hands, please. Anybody?
Trying to make it through these trials.
You're talking about, hey, Gloria Ortiz. Que
Hey,
pasó? Gloria in the house. What's up?
I just want to show you guys real quick. I got one of my kids. He's gonna read this.
You got Darnell's book.
Yeah, one of my kids is gonna read it. I told him about it. He looked it up, and he was like, "Miss Ortiz, can you get it for me?" And I was like, "Got you."
That's what's up. I love that. I love that.
Your books will be coming in a couple of weeks, I think, is what my bookkeeper told me.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm just glad that, and I want to say thank you on behalf of all the writers. What's been beautiful, y'all have been supporting every single writer who's come through here by buying at least one of their books. And that's a beautiful thing. And thank y'all for that. Thank y'all for that on behalf of them. Anyone else, thoughts, feelings about last week? We had Darnell Moore here last week, Darnell L. Moore. It was a heavy session, y'all. Y'all remember last week if you were here. Carla, anyone? Oh, hey, Monica. Hey. Hola.
Hola.
¿Cómo estás? ¿Está bien?
Yo muy bien, gracias. I was loving how comfortable Darnell was with speaking and addressing what some would consider heavy subjects. I think our job as writers and our job as thought leaders is to create permission for people to go to the depths, right? And it's I remember what a mentor of mine used to say, you can't lead where you don't go and you can't teach what you don't know. And he just perfectly embodied that. I loved it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Dara, hey, DK in the building. Hey. How are you?
I'm great. So I just wanted to say it's slightly a plug for our Friday night writes, but also some on your question, right? I think last week's conversation was so amazing, so powerful. I took about 6 different writing prompts from him, and a lot of people, there's only about 9 of us that showed up to do Friday night writes last week, but people were writing around these prompts and spending time with his words and ideas that he gave us last week. So one, I suggest, even if you don't come through, when you're listening to these speakers, take note of what they are saying and use that as a springboard for your own writing later, but also join us on Fridays while we're still doing this so that we can write together for Friday Night Writes. You'll see the invitation. It's not in there yet. It will be coming to join us 8 to 10 Eastern time to write together. But again, his writing was, I was like, I'm going like, wait, I got another prompt. Wait, another one. Oh my goodness. How do we get, like, I wrote like 6 or 7 down and I just shared it with the group for them to like springboard off of last week. So these have been a blessing that way.
Wow. Thank you for us. And thank you for saying that too. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to take us back to grade school or high school, even if some of us went to college, but it's like, I do think it's important for writers to take notes, seriously. You know, you have a wealth of information coming at you every week. I mean, these writers are incredible. You'll hear it tonight with Mr. Rodriguez. You know, I just don't think we should take it for granted. And yes, Michael Sindler, we're definitely going to have a spring session. We'll have a fall session again, then another spring session. I'm just going to keep going until we get tired. How about that? Is that cool? We just keep going.
That'll be forever.
Forever. Right on. Anyone else thoughts about last week or even previous weeks? You know, yes. Did I see a hand up? Anyone cool? Everyone cool?
I have something.
Yes, Samantha, I see your hand up. Elena, I see your hand up. Please go right ahead.
I haven't been to this fall session. I just returned today. Last time, as few people know, I've been in the spring session, but have you recorded some of the ones that you started with?
Yeah, they're always on, and Mr. Rodriguez will give you, I'll send you a copy personally. We're archiving every conversation, and they're on our Facebook group, Kevin Powell's Writing Workshop. So please join. There's now over 1,000 writers on that in that Facebook group, which is pretty incredible.
Okay.
Yeah. So it'll be there. It'll upload tonight, and I'll make sure it's there ASAP. Not a problem. Elena, I think you had your hand up as well, and then Will. I see you, Will.
Yeah, last week when Darnell talked about the radical love of the community, that just took me all the way back, because no one can love you, and I'm not saying this in prejudice to anybody, but no one can love you like the Black community. We always have those that are downtrodden in our community, but we accept them. And when he talked about how the family, it didn't matter what your situation was, you always had a couch to sleep on, a door you can come in, a meal you can eat, because of that radical love of the community. And I think that is something that a lot of people miss when they don't have that type of love, because it's non-judgmental, it's it's non-everything, but it's just love. It is. And I understood it totally, what he was saying when he said that, because that was how he was able to springboard himself out. Tupac talked about being a rose out of concrete, and that's what Donnell was. And we saw that, and we have so many of Donnells out there, but he was able to just springboard himself out and provide us with that strong testimony of where we come from and the radical love that helped them get there. And I love that.
No, I agree with you. And I will extend that to what you said. I definitely experienced that as a Black person as well. But one of the things that we're doing in this workshop this time around too is making sure that folks are exposed to Black, Latinx, white, straight, queer, non-gender conforming, Asian, different types of writers, because I think you'll see, and I believe Rodriguez as well tonight, that radical love actually extends to a lot of different communities. And I think it's important for me to say that as someone who's rooted in Black tradition, Black literature, but I also make it a point to always study the work of people that are outside my community as well. I think it's not either or, it's both, you know what I'm saying? And so, I think I agree with you, absolutely agree with you. And it spoke to me in a certain kind of way, but I'm also someone who grew up with Puerto Ricans, with Dominicans, you feel what I'm saying? With different types of people. And I saw that expressed in different places. So I just want to add.
I see that also, Kev, because we always accept everybody. It's like, I can remember there was a Caucasian guy he had some mental health issues, and he was always walking around the neighborhood, but you didn't mess with him. Yeah, we called him Crazy Joe, but we called him that out of an endearment. And if you mess with Crazy Joe, you were going to mess with us too, because he was just minding his business, being crazy. So we, that's what we called him. But now doing that would be, some sort of crime. But we did that out of love. Right. And when we no longer saw him, we found out where he was. We followed him to find out, we haven't seen him in a while. Have you seen him? And we had lots of characters like that in the community. But we loved them. We loved them, and we cared about them because they were all a part of our community. Even the Asian stores, they were part of our community. And they actually employed the community as well.
That's a question for us, mate. I don't know if that's a prompt that came up this last Friday Night Writes, but I think folks should consider writing a piece about what is radical love. In fact, can we write that down? I want us to write a short blog, all of us here. Let's put that in the chat, but also for the Facebook group. What is radical love to me? What is radical love to me? What does it look like? Will, hey Will.
Hey, peace, man.
Peace to you.
Peace. Doing? All right. Hey, I just wanted to thank everybody who reached out as far as the options that I was looking for to publish those haikus. Now, one of the things I noticed is that a lot of the publishing options, they figured that, or they consider the 575 format to be old or outdated. So I was kind of thinking, should I just publish it anyway, or do I have to rewrite it in the new format?
I think that's up to you. The beautiful thing about being a writer, it's self-empowerment. I mean, for me, I do 575. That's what I was taught haiku is, but if you want to do it that way, then you should do it that way. If you want to do it a different way, that's up to you. You know what I'm saying? But that's the way I do it. And I can't speak for anyone else but myself. And I think you got to do what's comfortable for you as a writer. Does that make sense?
Got it.
Yeah. I mean, I
personally, go ahead, Michael.
I'm the same way too. I'm very much a traditionalist, and I do 575, and I do tankas that are 575, 77, and ringas and all that. But it really is, those rules are there as a guide, and the whole thing as far as the break and the nature and all these things, they're things that have come down as tradition, but they're not set in stone. And so even if you normally do 575, if in a particular piece, you want to have, 363 or, 585, whatever, man, feel free,
That's
you
right.
know, be true to yourself above all.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Shakespeare, to thine own self be true. To thine own self be true. I agree with you. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, Polonius was
Shauna,
not such a dummy.
that's right. Shauna, Tavetta, then Jeannie. Y'all will be the last three. Then we're going to introduce our guest speaker, Louis J. Rodriguez. Hey, how y'all doing?
Hi.
Hey.
Oh, there you go. There's your girl, Esperanza.
Where? Oh,
In
there,
the
yes. Thank you. Great artist.
I was really moved by, is it Elena? She said it as well, the conversation around community.
Yes.
Like, I'm in Bridgeport in Connecticut, and it's like, I remember when I was in college, someone described it as that city you pass to get to Massachusetts.
Wow.
Like,
Wow.
nobody ever comes here. There's a lot of abandoned factories because it used to be an industrial city. And like, I'm doing a lot of work with historical preservation, and Little Liberia was a free Black community in the early 1800s. And we're restoring the last two houses. And it's amazing to me how, there could be so much history in a place and it's not accentuated or highlighted or even taught or learned enough. And how a place that could be so left behind in terms of people feeling it's okay to abandon the idea of restructuring it could actually still have so much life and resilience. There's definitely, it's a city, it's the biggest city in Connecticut, but it's also, so it has its stuff, it has its danger, it has its mess, but I mean, it has such a huge arts community and such a huge family structured community. So like, whenever people talk about it in a negative way, it's like, you're not just talking about the place, you're talking about the people.
That's right.
And it's a fight I have consistently. And when you start really understanding the history of the place, then people want to say, oh my God, like, and it's so important because I say it too, but it's also, I was thinking when he was talking last week about, why isn't who lives there enough to fight for that place, and want to make it as good as every other place in the country. There's kids here, there's people here, there's families here. And I don't know, I love the way he talked about his city, because sometimes I feel crazy because I'm always on some soapbox telling people to save everything. And a lot of people will tell you to give up. But I love seeing he's someone who doesn't.
And to your point, and Sister Melton, you're very modest. I mean, she's one of our dynamic leaders, not just in the writing community, but I consider you a leader there in Connecticut. I pay attention to the work that you do, I've done for years. And it's something that V spoke about, that Darnell spoke about. I'm sure Mr. Louis Rodriguez is going to speak about it tonight, which is community from art, like they go hand in hand. And thank you for saying that. We need to value where we are, value the folks that help us to create the artists, the people around us. Tavetta, then Jeannie, then we're going to introduce Mr. Rodriguez.
I just wanted to say I am still processing last week. It was like an immersion experience in a sense. The part that resonated with me a lot was the costly grace. And I talked about his smile in the beginning because where I live, I've seen people have joy and then have their joy stolen and never be able to reclaim their joy or their peace of mind. And so to see what it looks like to walk through that inside work of getting to a place where no matter what your environment is, you find the good in that environment, you celebrate the resilience in that environment, you embrace that costly grace. Those were the parts that resonated. And I just say thank you, because to see that in real life, what it looks like to be on the other side of some of the hardships that I see people walking through, and I am walking alongside them through that, it was encouraging. It was energizing, it was refueling. So just thank you for the space that you create, and then the people that you bring into the space that you have created. That was what I'm still processing.
Well, thank you. And I thank all the writers, including tonight's guest writer, for coming. I'll be honest with y'all. I'd be lying if I said to y'all a lot of writers are as accessible as the Luis Rodriguez's, as the V's, as the Darnell Moores. Unfortunately, I'm sure Mr. Rodriguez can speak to this. A lot of writers think they're too good to be a part of these kind of conversations, And I also am reaching out to writers that I know are very much about the community. They're highly successful at what they've done. They've been very blessed, been very fortunate. But also, I think it's our responsibility. Straight up, y'all, when I was coming up as a writer back in the day, it's not about age again. We have writers in this group who are teenagers, preteens, all the way up to 80 something. But wherever you are, you're a writer. You're a writer. You're a writer. I remember asking a couple of people, one writer in particular that I admired greatly, who was very successful, what do I need to do to become a writer? And all this person said to me is, well, you just got to hustle. I was just like, well, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? Can you tell me how to hustle and that's the point of this workshop. That's why we created it. That's why we're sharing information with each other, and I'm not saying everyone's going to get published at the same time. Not even saying everyone's going to get published, but my hope is, Tavetta, to your point, everyone's point, that, we see that this is possible by the folks that we're encountering every week. Does that make sense, y'all? We see that this is possible. This is possible. I can do this. Jeannie, and then we're going to introduce our guest writer, Jeannie.
Oh, first, I want to say two things. I just want to say hi to Will because he's been writing to me. I don't think he knows who I am, but I'm the haiku person. Cool. And also that the last time that our guest poet was here, I'm from East LA, and I bought 2 of his books immediately. Wow. And I couldn't stop reading them. I just want to tell you that to me, he was the most powerful poet that I've ever read. Wow. And I want to read a lot more.
Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. That's incredible. Thank you for saying that. East LA, shout out to LA, shout out to East LA, shout out to the West Coast. I'm going to shout out to Charlotte, North Carolina. Marla, I see you. They're joining with a book club tonight, which is great. The word is spreading about this, which is beautiful. But we ask everyone to please, if you've published anything, put the link in this chat. It could be a blog, it could be a poem, whatever it may be. Put it in the Facebook group as well. We encourage people to share their work, but also don't just share your work, also encourage other people, support other people as well. It's a two-way street. Is that cool, y'all? Can we at least agree to that? So, Luis J. Rodriguez is a novelist, memoirist, short story writer, children's book writer, essayist, as well as a community and urban peace activist, mentor, healer, youth and arts advocate, husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He has authored 16 books in all genres, including his best-selling autobiography, which I want to encourage everyone, if you've never read it, to please order it. Like, we'll put the link in there tonight. Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in LA. His latest memoir is the sequel, It Calls You Back, an odyssey through love, addiction, revolutions, and healing. And I mean, just think about that title of the second book for a second, y'all. There's a common theme throughout all of these workshops has been the word healing, 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 healing. I could say so much more, but the one thing I do want to stress, because when I was coming up, I heard about Tia Chucha Press, and I just think it's incredible, that he has Tia Chucha Centro Cultural and Bookstore in the San Fernando Valley, now in his 20th year. And the fact that he's not only a published writer, author, but he also has institutionalized his vision for art by creating a bookstore and community center. Think about that for a second. You know what I mean? He has institutionalized his vision for art and community with this center. And, a lot of us talk a lot about what we want to do for the community, what we think the community should be doing. Mr. Rodriguez is an example of actually doing it. And so I want to welcome to the stage, and can we unmute for a second, just give a warm welcome and applause for Mr. Luis J. Rodriguez.
Thank you.
Hey, sir, how are you?
I am so happy to be here. You have no idea. It's great to be among writers and a community of writers, which I find to be very important if you want to be a writer, to connect to a community of writers.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm glad to be here. I always have to point out that this Saturday, we just celebrated 20 years at Tia Chucha, Centro Cultural and Bookstore, and a new space. It's 3 times bigger than our previous space. We've grown, we're growing, and all these, we have a staff of 10 young people that are now running everything, and we have volunteers and interns, and we have so much support. 500 people came through on Saturday at different times, but they came through to celebrate with us.
Congratulations. Congratulations. And then y'all who are in California on the West Coast, the western part of the country, that's in the San Fernando Valley, if you're to Southern California, please make it a point to support. And we're going to be putting the links for your store, your books into chat throughout this evening. So please support Luis J. Rodriguez. How are you feeling, first of all? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great because of that. I'm also feeling a little sad because there's been a lot of, one thing I do want to say, community, the way I look at it is our mother. And we were talking about community, but I see it that way. We get nurtured by community. We have to be held by community. We have to hold community. And so one of the things that happens, especially with the pandemic, it hit our community really hard, just like I'm sure all your communities. People got hit really hard, and many of them aren't here. And me and my wife, my sons, my daughter, we're doing good. We survived it all, but so many people did not. I just want to mention that. We lost a lot of people in the last year and a half. And,
yes, yes.
And the other thing too is that it also means that we have to, I don't know how else to do, but we have to rebuild. It can't be the same old thing, and I think where writers have a role is to help illuminate the path. Where do we have to go from here? Because I think we have to think about something new. I'm afraid that we're going to get back to the world of Trump coming back, or at least people like Trump. It's like we keep going back and forth, and every time we mix it, things works for us. So we have to move beyond all that. And I hope that the writers here will use their writing, whether it's in fiction, poetry, whether it's in memoirs, whatever it might be, plays, use it to help be a beacon for the future that we need.
And you're right. In fact, this writers workshop here on Zoom and the Facebook group came out of COVID last year. That's why it was started, to bring people together. So thank you for saying that. Let's talk about your life and your work. When did the word first come to you, and what form did it come to you, and how young, the word?
Well, I have to say that I was somebody that fell through the cracks of language. I spoke perfect Spanish entering the schools, and I went to school in Watts, and Watts was my first community. I was there till I was 8 years old. And people should know that my communities, I don't know about other experiences, always been Black and brown. Black and brown was always our communities. Even when I was in Chicago, I lived in Chicago 15 years. People think that it's just a Black community or a Mexican community over here. We were always mixed because of restricted covenants. Mexicans could only live with Blacks. You understand what I'm saying? We couldn't live with white people with money. We could live with Asians and people like that, but we couldn't live with others other than Black and brown people. And so I grew up in this Watts. I love Watts. Watts is a great community. But the teachers and the principals, as you might know,
Please mute. Hold on 1 second. Please mute if you got background noise. Thank you.
I want to say that they punished us for speaking Spanish, which I'm sure some of you recall those days. I got swatted. I got held back in school. I was, 6 to 8 years old. I couldn't speak Spanish, my language, the language I knew. And they didn't teach us English very well, if you understand what I'm saying. So I fought to the cracks of language. What opened the door for me was, as people know my story, I was 7 years a heroin addict. I was in the streets. I was in a gang since age 11. I was in and out of jail, juvenile hall. I was homeless for 3 years. But one thing that happened is when I was 15 years old, I was homeless in the streets of downtown LA. I found this amazing place called the Central Public Library. I went in there and it was my refuge. It was the world. I mean, what I found with books, and again, I didn't know how to read really, but it didn't matter. I found stories. I used to read Charlotte's Web like 20 times. Children's books, because I wasn't used to writing to a book. But then eventually I moved quickly into Ray Bradbury and science fiction. Then I started reading all the immigrant story books, the Theodore Dreiser stories of the Irish or Jewish experience. But the books that really opened me up was the Black Power books that were coming out. That was the time. The autobiography of Malcolm X, James Baldwin, George Jackson, Perry Thomas, the Puerto Rican. I used to practically memorize lines from down these mean streets. I'm so glad that I came up when those books were happening. because they opened my world and eventually gave me a seed of a crazy idea that maybe I might be able to write a book. They don't have to be a spectator in this world. They like actually be somebody with something important to say and to give. And that eventually worked out. If you go to that library now, you'll see shelves with my name on there and others. Garcia Sanchez's, Cisneros, and all kinds of people that have published since then. But that's what it was. That library opened up the world for me.
Let's go back for a second. For those who may not be familiar with your story, can you talk about your childhood? What was your childhood like before all those things happened, you know, in your life, starting at age 11, before 11?
Well, I was born on the border, but my last book of essays is called From Our Land to Our Land. I am indigenous to this land. I'm not an immigrant. My mother's Tarahumara Rarámuri native from Chihuahua, Mexico. And we lived in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, but we went across the international bridge when my mom was going to have me so I could be born in El Paso, Texas. But El Paso is also part of the Chihuahua Desert, just like where we were. It's all one place. And the Rarámuri people, the Tarahumara, have been there for tens of thousands of years. We were going from our land to our land. Despite a border that only been around less than 200 years, it was our land. So I don't consider myself, I consider myself a migrant, like a lot of us. I am part of that tradition. So, but we ended up in LA when I was 2 years old. And again, we ended up in Watts, and it was one kind of instability after another. My dad was an educated man in Mexico, which is rare. Most Mexicans were working class, just people, migrants. But my dad was educated. None of his credentials were recognized. He ended up working in factories. He ended up working in construction. He ended up selling pots and pans. He didn't know where to get a job, and eventually became a janitor. That became the job. My mom also worked. She was a costurera. She worked in the garment industry, which was very exploitative, extremely. She even did the piecework at home, where they would bring a big giant machine that I got a poem called The Monster. It's about this big giant machine that used to rattle our little shack, you know, because my mom all night long would be on that machine trying to make the pieces that they hardly paid her for. In other words, I fell through the cracks of a family that worked, that couldn't be at home. You know what I mean? Somebody has to. We had, there's 4 kids from my mom and dad, and then I had 4 half brothers and sisters. They came in our lives and whenever they could. But I was a kid that fell through the cracks. And I started early in Watts. I started stealing when I was 7 years old, going to stores. I started hanging around with the wrong crowd. I had behavioral problems. I was extremely smart, even though, again, my language issues were bad. I was extremely smart. I was already becoming a trouble kid. When we moved to the east side, and I'm talking about the San Gabriel Valley part of the east side, just north of Montebello, and I think you know what I'm talking about. We eventually moved to Boyle Heights, St. Terrace, and all the communities there. But I was on the part of San Gabriel Valley that was a migrant community there was 100 Mexican migrant communities in San Gabriel Valley, but there was surrounded by white suburbs. We were dirt roads, goats and chickens in people's backyards, little shacks. It looked more like Appalachia, even though more dense. But we were surrounded by these nice white neighborhoods. And so we were at war with not just other barrios, but we were at war with the racist whites. John Birch Society ran a lot of city councils and school boards. They hated the Mexicans in the San Gabriel Valley. And this is before Asians came in, by the way, because now there's a lot of Asians there. But at the time, it was mostly all white, powerful, and their army was the sheriff's department. So I was at war with police who killed 4 of my friends unarmed. I was at war with other gangs, barrios, other neighborhoods. I was at war with these white people. I felt like I was in a war zone. And that's really the context of my life growing up, that I was in a war zone. I fell through the cracks. I joined a gang early. I was on drugs quite early. And then I was in the street, and it was like, who's gonna pull me out of that war zone? Who's gonna bring me out? That's the story of Always Running.
What do you say to people who don't understand why a lot of young people end up in gangs? What do you say to them?
Well, I had to say something that may be hard to understand, but for some young people, it makes rational sense. They have to understand that, and gangs are old. I mean, you know, Irish were gang members. Anybody that was put down, pushed aside, joined gangs. Jewish communities, the Italians, as you know, everybody. Gangs is a phenomenon of poverty, phenomena of the industrial and post-industrial world. Is phenomena of not being able to belong and you create your gangs. And we were like Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and others, we created our gangs too. Why? Because there was no place for us. We had no claim, no fame. Nowhere could we go. The walls were our only place to put our names up there. I had a placazo, which is my gang name. I put it on all the walls. I was a graffiti artist and I did huge, amazing pieces. They weren't tagging. I mean, it was like huge pieces. My barrio, my name, my homies. That was the way that I could claim myself. And so gangs became a place to belong and to join, because usually the families weren't there or there was nowhere else to go. We didn't have the clubs, we didn't have the sports programs, we didn't have a lot of things that other people might have. We had to make it our way, on our own way. Though I will say this, I don't think we started off as gangs. I don't think we even called ourselves gangs. I think that became the way society saw us, treated us, and eventually we took it on. And one of the things that happened in the 60s and 70s that I think it's important, two things that eventually got worse in the 80s. To undermine the youth of these streets, they were beginning to organize, the Watch Rebellion, the East LA Chicano Moratorium. There was all this struggle in LA, just like in Chicago, like in New York and all these places. They brought drugs heavy duty into the community. And heroin was the number one thing. There was red, there was whites, there was everything, but heroin came, and I don't even know, all of a sudden heroin was everywhere. And eventually all my homies, every one of my member of my gang became my heroin addict. And then they brought in guns. Vietnam was going on. Guys were coming out. They were mentally impacted and or they were on heroin themselves and they knew how to use weapons. People don't realize how the Vietnam vets contributed to the escalating of violence in our neighborhoods, because they knew how to kill people now. But they had nowhere to go. They had no jobs. They had nothing to do. And it wasn't all of them. Many of them were good people, hardworking citizens, but I'm talking about the few that stayed in the barrio and were now taking the gang to another level. I saw all this. I witnessed this. All of a sudden, guns were everywhere. And we weren't about guns, if you understand what I'm saying. We weren't about those things. All of a sudden, it was everywhere. And then the violence escalated. And so by the time I was 18, 25 of my friends were killed. Most
25.
Of them, yeah, 25. I was a war zone. 25, most of them by rival gangs, of course, by police, by heroin, but 25 of my friends, people I cared, I loved. Again, two of my best friends. I didn't want any more best friends because they were being killed all the time. Two of my best friends were killed. And that is enough to close off any door. And this is why I had to tell the story of always running, because what changed me was not, I wasn't scared of prison and I wasn't scared of dying. That's the problem with a lot of these hardcore gang kids. They don't want care if they die. They'll kill you first if they can. If not, you kill them. They were prepared. They're not scared of any of this stuff. That's why scared straight doesn't work with these kids. That nonsense of scared straight, if it worked for you, you weren't part of that world. But what I was talking about was cared straight. Somebody had to love and care about us. Somebody had to step in, a mentor, a guide. And that's what I had. One person who stood by me through every rotten thing that I went through, every heroin overdose, every time I was in jail, he stood by me no matter what. And that's why I eventually found a lifeline, you know what I mean? And he did it not by saving me. He gave me the tools, the resources, the connections, so I could save myself. And I think that's the powerful way that a mentor can impact young people who are lost.
How old were you when you met this mentor?
You know what? He came around when I was 16 years old. I was homeless and out of school. I'd been kicked out. I was not going anywhere. And they created this culture center. I had to tell the story. It's the culture center, community center in my neighborhood. Who would do this? I have no idea. I broke in the night before and graffitied all the walls. Huge, again, placas, my gang name, everything. The next morning I showed up, it was a grand opening. I showed up to see my handiwork. They saw me, the people that ran the place, they knew who I was, and they just hired this guy. I called him Chente in my book. He had another real name that I couldn't use, but he came by and they said, arrest him, call the police, he's here. The guy that graffitied all the walls. The guy came up to me and talked to me, and he didn't arrest me. He did quite an amazing thing. He talked to me. And at first I told him to drop dead. I don't want anything to do with him. I don't care what you do. Call the cops, I don't care. My attitude, I had a terrible attitude. And people don't know that the reason why young people have that is because they don't invest emotionally in adults, because they know most adults will give up. Why put any investment in them? They're all going to walk away. I was going to scare and run away everybody. Teachers ran away. My parents ran away. They had kicked me out of the house when I was 15. Everybody would run away. He did not. And that made all the difference, because I think me, like other young people, really want respectful, meaningful relationships with adults. We just couldn't find it. And that's what he was. He was that guy that stood by me, guided me, tried to teach me, tried to help me through everything. I don't even know why he would stand it. He stood through a lot of fire just to help me get through what I had to get through.
What was that fire? Can you talk about what was that fire that you went through before you finally said, okay, I'm here?
I would tell you that it was the fire of the social justice struggles of the time. I was very taken up by what was going on in the Black communities, but also Chicano movement, Native American AIM, the Young Lords, Puerto Ricans. I really loved that stuff. Those are the books I was reading. You know, it wasn't the world that I was actually living in, but I was reading. That's why the library is amazing. I learned about stuff I would not have learned if I had, and nobody in my neighborhood liked books. I was the weird homie with books. I would bring books to the neighborhood out. Hey man, it's Chin, Louis, he's got books, but they didn't disrespect me for it. That's his thing. Okay, nobody else loved books. Books were amazing. And I read about all these people and activists, and I read about Che Guevara, and I read about all these leaders and struggles and revolution and change. Man, I was hungry for that. I'm gonna tell you, man, I was so hungry to be out of the world I was in, but I didn't know I was. I didn't know how hungry. I would have to say the other thing too. I was very rageful, extreme rage. And you know, there's probably the worst rage is when somebody's got a good heart. I don't know if it's hard to imagine, because I've seen rageful people, but I know that the worst rage is when you have a good heart and you've been hurt, disappointed, betrayed, or abandoned. And the rage is very deep. And I was so rageful. So I was prepared to kill people. I have shot people. I have stabbed people. I was involved when we were going after the police, when they exonerated the people that killed my friends, the cops. We shot at them. We shot the ghetto bird. The ghetto bird came out of the Watts Rebellion. It was in my neighborhood, all kinds of neighborhoods. We were one of the first, only one of two neighborhoods at the time that ever shot one down. I was at war and I didn't care. But that's what my mentor was helping me with, shaping that fire to something precise, something artistic, something creative. I started painting murals because of him. Instead of just doing the graffiti, I ended up painting 10 murals with 13 gang kids, and we got paid. He arranged it so we can get paid. I was 17 years old. I also started to write. I started to write when I was in Murderers Row when I was 16 years old. They were trying to get me for 3 murders that I obviously didn't do, but it doesn't matter. That's the world that you're in. And I started to write there. Just started to scribble. It was terrible writing. That's not the point. Other people drew, other people played cards. I was writing. And that writing, by the way, has taken me through all these years. I still have two of the poems that I wrote at that time that just came to me. I'm working with a guy that did 28 years in prison. And his name is Casasi Hill. He was the head of the Piru Bloods here in the Northeast San Fernando, which is another Black and brown community. And but he came out of prison as a poet, and he has this great poem called "They're Still Good in Me," because he murdered people. He called shots for the Piru Bloods. He did a lot of damage, but somehow something hit him somewhere. He was in solitary. He said he was in solitary, and it broke him. Here's what he says: "But it got me to see they're still good in me. I have to build on that good." And that's something that I think I eventually did. They're still good in me. I had a gradient that needed to be helped and guided. And there was also a lot of bad in me, you know, and I could have gone that way as well. But the good kept being helped and developed, and I kept taking it further. That's what I think it's important for people to understand.
Can you talk about the addiction and what that almost did to you?
Well, I was one of those guys that thought, I'm never going to be like that hype on the corner. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I can take heroin. Hey, I can handle it. You know how it is. You think, hey, no big deal. I started using it at 12, but I was snorting it
at 12.
Yeah, and putting it on weed, and eventually by 15, I was using it intravenously. And I still thought, well, I'm not going to be like those junkies, you know. But what you end up using in a week, you eventually start using in a day. It's never enough. Then you realize that you're right there, right next to these people. You know, then you realize that, man, you thought you weren't going to be like them, and you're right there. the thing that helped me was my mentor was trying to get me off these drugs. He got me to a lot of stuff, but he couldn't do it. And I quit after the last time I was arrested. I was facing many years in prison. I didn't do the prison time, but what I ended up doing was I got eventually convicted in the county jail, and that was the last time I ever got convicted. I walked out of there. But I decided, and this is in one of my memoirs, to quit heroin in jail. That's one of the hardest places to do it because heroin is everywhere. Everybody is going to give you stuff, but I didn't. One thing that he taught me that was very important, regardless of what happens in this world, don't be owned by anybody. You own your life. You turn everything to heroin owns you. You turn everything to the gang owns you. He was constantly telling me, you got to own it. Don't turn it over. And guess what? I'm sitting in jail and all the prison gangs are there. Mexican mafia is organizing all the Chicano gangs and the Bloods, the Crips at the time wasn't Bloods, then Crips are coming up, Haywood's coming up. And I have to make a decision. I don't want to be owned by these people. But if I'm a heroin addict, I'm no good to anybody. So on my own, I decided to go cold turkey because you didn't have recovery programs in the barrio in those days. I went cold turkey in the county jail with the help of people that knew what to do. And that was the beginning of me saying, I'm going to go to prison. I'm going to do it on my terms. This is what my mentor was giving me. Master your life, do things on your term, even if you're going to go to prison. Now, luckily, I didn't do the prison term, but I did learn that lesson. Don't get owned by anything or anybody. And by the way, I loved heroin. I would tell you that I look forward to heroin. Heroin was something that I love to do, but it does get to the point where you're not even feeling good anymore. You're just trying to stop the pain. And after a while, even heroin becomes why? And yet you can't let it go because the pain is quite extraordinary pain.
What was the pain, the traumas that you felt that when you think about it now, that you were carrying around as such a young person? What were all of the things that you were grappling with?
Well, I'm going to tell you, and it's in my memoirs. My dad was a very cold person, detached, and he was raised during the Mexican Revolution. And people may not know, but the Mexican Revolution was one of the most horrendous acts of violence in the world, especially at the time. From 1910 to 1930, there was two major uprisings in Mexico. My dad was born we don't know because his whole village was destroyed during the revolution, but he got it out. He was born between 1911 and 1913. Anyway, he grew up and he became a very cold, detached person. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He also did something awful that I wasn't aware till later. He molested my sisters. This came up later and it's in my books. I had to address and deal with that. Not only that I hate him because he was a cold, detached person, but I hated him because he molested my sisters. And I was completely racked by that pain. My mother, I have to say, and I love my mom dearly, she passed not too long ago, was carrying all the burden that my dad would put on her and us. You know what I'm saying? The emotional burden, the burden of raising us. She was working the best she could, and then she had to deal with these 4 crazy kids, and I was the worst one. And her frustration, you can tell. She was hitting us all the time. The chancla, the manguera, the cinto, you all know what I'm talking about. She would use everything to hit us with, the tabla, everything just to get me straightened out, in particular, me and my brother. But after a while, it stopped working because you hit people so much after a while, it's like it ain't gonna do nothing. And I remember the last time she hit me, I refused to cry. I wouldn't cry. I was 10 years old. I said, I'm not crying. My brother was 3 years older. He says, don't cry. We're not going to cry. And we didn't. And my mom was so frustrated because she couldn't even stand up straight. You know how frustrating that is? And I don't want to put my mom down. I love my mom. I don't blame her. I know she was frustrated. It's hard being in these communities with poverty, with violence, with so much discrimination. You know how it is. You see that in all these communities. So I still give a lot of love to my mom. But that's what impacted me. I couldn't have a family at home. And then the streets, there was so much racism, there was so much barriers, so much blocks. And then the own traumas of our own people. My worst enemies were my own people. You know, I got more messed over by other Mexicans than blacks or whites. You know, I mean, the Mexicans were the worst to each other. We were mean to each other. We were constantly elevating our way of being. And that's why the whole Cholo culture came up in LA. I was part of the first generation of Cholos. I mean, we had a whole culture that was so traumatized and formed that people from other cultures became cholos because they couldn't find anything close. The Crips and Bloods were choloized African Americans. The Cambodians came from the killing fields. I know some of them. They became cholos. The Salvadorians from Civil War in El Salvador, Guatemalans, they became cholos, and they took on the tattoos that we had. We were the first ones to create the black and gray tattoos that everybody uses now. I mean, rap stars have them, basketball stars, everybody has them, but it was just us, the street kids, tattooing ourselves, the lowrider culture, which was a whole different way of seeing cars and remaking them and rebuilding them. It was like in Nexus to black and brown, as far as I can tell. And then hip hop comes in, very similar. Nexus to black and brown, by the way. People don't always forget that. But it's important to point out that those were expressions of highly traumatized young people using arts, using writing, using music, using anything they could to fight back against a world in which there was no other way to struggle against.
When you think about it now, I mean, and I come from a similar background as you, very similar in so many ways. Why do people just ignore poor people, working class people? Like, no matter what the color of the people, you know, we'll label poor white trash, we'll call people ghetto, we'll call them hood. But, you know, we say these things. What do you say to people, you know?
Well, I have to say that there's a lot of money and profit and gain from poor people. If it wasn't a profitable thing, we wouldn't have poor. There's a lot of people that make a lot of money off people being poor. And I think that's hard to connect, but I think that's behind the prison industrial complex, behind the nonprofit industrial complex, behind all these complexes. There's money to be made. Reason why mass incarceration got so big is because it became a big money-making industry. And a lot of people benefited. That mostly were white, I would have to say, and not just all whites. I mean, there's poor whites that are also part of this thing, but I'm talking because poverty impacts the whites just like impacts everybody. But there's people with power and money that have gained from our oppression, from our pain, from our traumas. Even the recovery program, and I've been recovering, by the way, 28 years. I have been clean and sober now 28 years. Because after I was on drugs for 7 years, I drank for 20 years. I'm all clean and sober. But even the recovery industry is an industry. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
People, the answers are money makings. And so I find that as long as you can make money off the pain of others, it will continue. We have to take the profit motive out of recovery, out of trauma, out of poverty. We got to, out of imprisonment. That's what everybody's talking about. You know, out of policing. All of these have a profit motive to keep things in place so that some people, not all of us, some people can benefit tremendously. It is a class and race intersection that we have in this country. And I think it's important to point that out. Me as a writer, I find it important to tell that story. You know, because I've written a novel about music of the mill. I worked in a steel mill just to survive. I worked in industry. I needed to tell that story. I have all kinds of stories and poems about this intersection of class and race that happens in the United States. Happens in other countries, but we have a particular way that this particular expresses itself. So I think it's important to understand, because I think poverty can end. I think it's totally within our power to end it. There's no political will, and there's no economic basis to end it. We have to change the very way that we create wealth in this country, and change it in such a way that there's not a gap anymore between the wealth and the poor.
When did you first start to feel that you were a writer?
I would have to say that speaking of the steel mill, you know, when I got out of jail, the only thing I could do was work, because otherwise I'm stealing. You know, otherwise I'm back in the gang. I decided to leave La Vida Loca. It was a hard decision. That meant no more crime, no more drugs, no more heroin. So you had to work. So I worked in all this industry. So one of the last jobs I ever had, though, was this big giant steel mill. People may not be aware that LA is the largest manufacturing center in the country. It's bigger than Chicago and Detroit and Cleveland. I know it's hard to imagine. Overall, the Midwest is bigger, but just LA. We had everything: auto plants, we had rubber plants, we had defense industries, we had garment industry, we had steel mills. The steel mill, I was working in the steel mill, and I was becoming very depressed because I love working in the mill. There's a lot of good work. I was working as a mechanic, millwright, as they call it, but my poetry was dying. You understand what I'm saying? I was feeling that my passion for the words, painting with words, because I stopped painting on the walls. I started painting with words, was dying. And I made a crazy decision to quit all those jobs to become a writer. And I say it's crazy because when I told my family that, they thought I was crazy when I was on drugs and in gangs. But when I told them I wanted to be a writer, they completely, you're gone, forget it, you're no good. We can't even, they completely wrote me off. It was the worst thing I could do was to be a writer. It's like, who does that? Who writes? Who? It was the worst thing I could do. I had to do it because something in me was dying. And it went against all, odds because my friends thought I was crazy. You got a good job working in the steel mill. How hard is it? It's so hard to get these jobs. You could buy a house. You know how it is. Everybody that's poor wants to be in the middle class. And I was so unhappy. And I decided to walk into this East LA weekly newspapers. They were throwing newspapers. The advertisements kept on going and says, I want to work with you all. In East LA, right there in Boyle Heights, on Soto and Brooklyn. And they said, yeah, but okay, we'll hire you, but you also got to take out the trash, answer the phones, and sweep the floors. I did all that. That was the beginning of my writing life. I went to school at night, East LA College, to take creative writing, journalism, and speech. Again, the areas of language that I have been deprived. I wanted to be good. Now I did it to dominate English because I know this English is this country's language. I don't have no problem with that. It's a common language. It's not an official language, but it's this common language. I didn't lose my Spanish. Hasta hoy día hablo bien el español. Siempre, por parte de mis padres. But I didn't lose my Spanish, but I needed to get to English because I wanted to be a writer in this world, speaking to this country, speaking to Americans and the world through that. So I went to school at night. Again, I never got a degree, never finished college, never did, but I took those classes. And I'll tell you one other great story, and I love these stories. I went to a journalism class with a man named Mr. Takagi, a Japanese-American teacher. And it was a night classes where a lot of poor working people go. I went there, there was 15 kids the first week, kids, young people. The next week, they were all gone but me. That's what happens in those classes. People work, they have kids, they can't. So Mr. Takagi tells me, oh, I'm gonna have to drop this class. I know he got paid per student, you know what I'm saying? And I was so disappointed. I go, oh man, I really wanted this class. He said, oh, I'm sorry. But as I walked out, he did the most amazing thing. He came up to me and said, listen, Mr. Rodriguez, if you come every week, I'll be here. Wow. If you come every week, I will show up. I showed up every week and Mr. Takagi was there every darn week. And I know that he was getting paid and I know he probably drove from who knows distances. He showed up for this guy who he didn't have to give me the time of day. People like that, I say angels come out of the woodwork when you finally move towards your destiny. People like that, I couldn't even imagine them. People like that helped me get through what I needed to get through to stay in this writing path.
Did you ever suffer from what a lot of us have suffered from who come from some environments, what we call survivor's guilt, like why me, why did I survive, not the others?
Oh, absolutely. And I think this led me to want to, I don't know what to say, but eventually even do dangerous things because in many ways I felt I shouldn't be here. I was fortunate to not only overcome 3 overdoses, overcome getting shot at half a dozen times and never being hit, by the way, including point blank range and machine gun fire, because that's the nature of a war, getting shot at all the time. But far better people than me were getting shot at and dying. And people would say to me, well, maybe God was on your side. I find that very hard to comprehend because I don't know why God wasn't on their side. You know what I'm saying? So I have to say it's a mystery. It's not a riddle. I don't have to solve it. It's a mystery. I just have to know that it's a mystery and I have to live my life now the best way I can for those that didn't make it. You understand what I'm saying? For those that died that should not have died. For those whose stories can't be told that I have to not tell. You know what I mean? I'm here for a reason that people say it's a reason. Fine. I don't know if there's a reason, but I'm going to make a reason. I'm going to be here for the right reason. I don't have to resolve or answer that riddle. It's not a riddle. It's a mystery. And some mysteries, you just got to live through them. You know what I'm saying? People want to answer everything. He said, no, sometimes you don't need an answer. The way spirit works is some things are mysteries. I'm just going to live right through that mystery. I don't know why I survived. I don't know why it was me. I'm no better than any of these people, but here I am. You know what I mean? So I'm going to make something amazing like that. And so I sentenced myself to a lifetime of community service. No judge did that, no court, nobody. I did it myself. I'm going to set myself to live out a life that was worthy of the people that didn't make it.
You sentenced yourself to a lifetime of community service. Wow. When did you first get published?
Well, actually, this is another interesting story. After jail, after I was in the Murder's Row at 16, I got out of all that stuff.
You were in Murder's Row at 16?
Yeah. I had a cell next to Charles Manson because he was going to trial at the time. And so, but I got through.
You were in the cell next to Charles Manson.
Yeah. So that's another story. It's in my memoir. But when I got out, I kept writing on my own. And I will have to mention another person. There was an administrator. I had dropped out, but there was an administrator and teacher at the schools that I used to go to who liked me. And her name was Ms. Isabel Thurber. So she got my crazy writings. I had an old Remington typewriter that I used to type with 2 fingers. I found it in the garage sitting there. My dad had pushed it aside. It was all messed up. It was messed up, had all the sticky, you know what I'm saying, those ribbons and things were stick. I started typing my stories, and she took all that stuff and retyped everything on onion paper. It was a very beautiful thing. Why would Miss Thurber do this? I have no idea. What a great person. I don't even know why she would care. Somebody sent that to a contest, and I was 18 years old, and I was still on heroin when I won honorable mention in a Chicano literary contest out of Berkeley. Honorable mention and $250, which in 1973 was a lot of money. And they also took me on my first plane ride ever. I never been on a plane in my life. I was, you know what, I've been shot at, I've been in Murder's Row, I've been all kinds of things. I was more scared of that plane ride than I ever was scared of anything. Man, I had never been in a plane and I was scared to death. But I got on that plane, I went to Berkeley, but here's the story. I was getting hurt for heroin, you know. And I said, well, I'm gonna go down the street and score. You can score anywhere. You know where, you always know where to go, even if you don't know the community. I didn't know Berkeley from nowhere, but I'll find it. I knew where I could find it. So I was getting ready to leave, and somehow I was leaving the hotel, and then there was a group of people there in the lobby. They were the people that had created this contest and invited me over, and they saw me, says, come into a poetry reading. I said, I don't want to go. I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to go to this poetry reading, but I didn't want to be really totally mean. I said, okay, let me go, and then I'll sneak out. So I went within this poetry reading, and it turned out it was Jose Montoya, the godfather of Chicano poetry.
Yes.
Henderson, the Black great poet, performance poet of the 60s. And Pedro Pietri, the great Puerto Rican writer. All 3 of them were reading.
Pietri.
Pedro Pietri, can you imagine those 3 guys?
Wow.
So I'm hearing them, and they changed my life. They grabbed me by the throat, their words, their stories, the way that they performed. All of a sudden I was mesmerized, you know, I was taken aback by the power of language and poetry and the way it could be presented. And I didn't leave to get the heroin, you know, I mean, I was still hurting, but the point was I was completely taken, and that stayed with me for the rest of my life, thinking that maybe I want to do that. You know what I'm saying? I want to be that person. So I got taken by these little experiences, these moments, these angels that came and supported me, these people that shouldn't give me the time of day, but it was enough to overcome that rage and that heartache and the disappointments and pain and the killing, you know, spirit that I had, so that I could heal and heal enough through the very wounds that I was going through, find my own gifts. Because that's what I think we got to do with trauma. Not just take it away, not just push it away, not just say it's terrible. It's the spiral that we have to get through to get to the very gifts we have to give to the world.
How much has been, or how much was writing a part of your healing journey?
It became everything for me, because I gave up eventually all those jobs. I gave up all the other arts, not that they weren't good. It's just, honestly, writing was my passion. And I didn't really eventually, well, after I gave up all those jobs, I ended up working as a journalist. I got on the summer program for minority journalists out of UC Berkeley. It was a summer program. I got my first newspaper job. I got blacklisted from newspapers because I was an advocate and somebody that tried to bring in social justice consciousness to things, but it didn't matter. I kept pushing it. I did poetry in the streets, poetry in bars and cafes. I went to Chicago and was part of the Poetry Slams movement, you know what I'm saying? I started doing workshops in prisons. I started doing workshops in prisons over 40 years ago, because since I didn't do state prison time, I never forgot the ones I did. I went back to prisons to teach writing, and I've done healing circles there, poetry events and lectures. And one thing you also know, because it's my second memoir, Calls You Back, my son was called to the madness. One thing is the madness will call you back. And it caused me back by rage, by addiction, but then it took my son. And my son joined a gang in Chicago. And 2 years after he joined a gang, he started his first prison term. And he eventually did a total of 15 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. This is terrible for anybody. You don't want your son in that world, you know what I'm saying? And I was gonna lose my son. I had to really work hard at trying to save him. So just before he actually got into the really worst trouble, I wrote Always Running. And it was a catalyst to write Always Running to help my son Ramiro, because I didn't know what else to do. And that book eventually helped him and so many other people. I will have to say that what helped Always Running is the LA Uprising. Even though I was living in Chicago, the LA Uprising got everybody thinking about LA gangs now.
1992.
Bloods, what's Sureños, what MS-13, they want to know about LA gangs now. And I happen to have the one book, Memoir, that could tell that story. So Always Running became a bestseller. Of the timing, I didn't even plan that. I mean, somebody says, hey, maybe you started the uprising just to get your book sold. I mean, that's trying to be funny. No, but the timing was perfect. I had no plan. A year after the uprising, my book comes out. And then a year after that, Simon & Schuster buys the paperback, and everything changed for me. Now, after that, I started working for myself completely as a writer. I quit everything. I remember I went 30 cities in 3 months, 93 when the book first came out. I was on Oprah Winfrey. I was in Good Morning America. I was in Entertainment Weekly. All of a sudden, I was all over the world. People wanted to know about these gangs and these life. And some of it was kind of demonizing the gangs or maybe glorifying them. And I was telling them, it's neither one of those things. This is the world. This is the reality. And I think I was trying to speak to that as best I could. So that's what made it happen. And just so you know, my son did do all those years in prison, but he came out 10 years ago. He's doing really well right now.
Thank God. Good.
He's doing really well. He became clean and sober. He's into his own indigenous spiritual practices. He's helping others, mentor formerly incarcerated, works with gangs and youth. I'm very proud of my son, Ramiro. He's 46 years old. He's a grandfather. So he's a grown man, but he's now becoming a mentor and a guide to others. And I have to say that he did leave that craziness, which is hard for me to leave, and then to see him do it. And he was in it in Chicago, as you know, when it was going complete crazy. It's still bad news that he was right in the 90s when Chicago was strongly bad, even though people may not also be aware that LA was worse at the time. But LA's gotten better for a lot of good reasons. But one of the things is writing became my healing power, my healing source, my way of overcoming a lot of things. And this is why I go into the prisons using writing as a way to heal, as a way to transform.
Could you have imagined all those years ago, you would have 16 books and a bookstore / cultural center?
I never imagined it, but this is why I believe destiny works. It works in spite of you sometimes. Sometimes it works because of you. In my case, it worked in spite of me. And I met that destiny. It's a big challenge that everybody has. Some people don't even know they have it. Some people know, but they don't want to look at it. Some people run away from it. Some people try it. Sometimes they have a hard time. But the challenge of meeting your destiny is our life challenge. I was fortunate to have met it somehow against, again, all these great odds, against a crazy father, against all the madness of the streets, the discrimination, the pains of the society we're in. But then I've seen things develop, as you know, even during the George Floyd protests, I saw, oh, this is where we're going. This is the way I remember when I was a youth and how it captured me. And then I saw all these young people being captured, you know what I'm saying? Black Lives Matter and things have to change. And the people at the Achuchas, the young people at our community center, were all taken up by it. They're all radicals now. They're all thinking poetic radicals, but they're doing it in a beautiful way, because I think there's a radicalism that has to be about more beauty, more truth, and more decency. And that's important for me, because you're talking about radical love, and I really believe that's a great, beautiful concept. It's about loving differently and also expansively. It's different than what people think it is. And so I try to create that with the Achuchas, to create a community that people really care and love each other. And again, going back to what I said earlier, going back to our mother community and nurturing that community and educating that community and cultivating these ideas and this consciousness. That's what we have to do as writers and artists and poets and singers and musicians.
For writers out there, what do you feel absolutely needs to be in the writer's toolbox? If you were creating that toolbox for a writer, what needs to be there?
Well, I really recommend, if possible, the writers write in all genres. I know our country tends to compartmentalize writing. There's master's programs, you're a poet, maybe you're fiction, but the rest of the world doesn't see writing that way, as you know. Writers were poets, and they also were fiction. They also were journalists, wrote plays. Neruda is my favorite poet, probably one of the best poets of the 20th century, if not the best. Exactly. And he was all those things. He wrote plays, he wrote journals, he was a journalist, he was a diplomat even, and he wrote all the amazing poetry that he did. And that's what I think all writers should do. We should not be stuck to any genre. Now, I say that, and then I say, but if a genre speaks to you, and that is the genre that best exemplifies your soul, your spirit, who you are, go there. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to block anybody from doing that. I'm just saying, don't just limit yourself, because I think writers should be writers and learn all those things. And I became a multi-genre writer. I've had so many people tell me, don't do that. Why don't you stay with poetry? Why don't you stay with fiction or memoir? Just be a memoirist. And say, no, I want to learn all of it and be good at all of it. We could. You don't have to be bad at any of it. I try to be good at all of it. When I wrote my novel, I tried to do the best I could. I wrote short stories, my essays, all my op-ed pieces, my journalism. I try to be good at all of it. My poetry, it's a mastery of your skills and your capacity. Learn to master it. I mean, that to me is, I always tell the guys in prison, you're trying to create masterpieces. And these guys, they're always thinking they will, which is fine. But I say, but you're the real masterpiece. You're a creative act yourself. You need to be the master of your own life and be the masterpiece that you're actually creating. That you yourself as a human being is a more refined, defined, carefully shaped human being that can do some great, beautiful things, wonderful things, and good, decent things in this world.
What would you put in that love toolbox? What would be in that toolbox called love? What needs to be in that toolbox?
Well, I think the biggest, most important thing is to let the heart lead. Because, I do a lot of indigenous spiritual practices. And if anybody knows, there's a lot of protocols in it. If anybody's ever done sweat lodges or ever done anything, and I've done this because that's my spiritual practice. I don't proselytize. I don't try to convert nobody. I work with Christians. I work with Catholics. I work with Buddhists. I work with Muslims. I work with everybody. Atheists. Some of the best people I know are atheists. I ain't got no issue with any of that stuff. But what I do have to say is my spiritual practice is my indigenous, because I went back to my mother's roots, you know what I mean? But one thing I noticed, and I learned from my 25 years ago, a Dene elder from the Navajo reservation adopted my wife and consequently the whole family. And he's been my teacher for 25 years. And we go to the reservation in Arizona. Every year we were going for ceremony and family. But one of the things he told me, whatever you do, even in spiritual practice, just like in any art, lead with your heart. The heart has to be open. The heart has to be present. And that, to me, it's an important thing about love. That heart is the most important thing in love, in any kind of relationship. Lead with your heart. There's another thing that they teach you is, we have feminine, masculine energies. And sometimes we get them all mixed up. They put binaries on them, and that's not the way indigenous people look at it. It is fluid, but we still recognize the feminine and masculine energies. And one of the things that's important to point out is that feminine is really not equal to masculine. In our society, we've made the masculine the overwhelming thing. That's what patriarchy is. Masculine runs everything. The way we think, it's the bottom line. It's money. It's practical things. Everything goes over. Yes, there's imagination, dreams, and all creation. But the other hand, there's more led by masculine. Well, the real thing in nature is the feminine leads. The feminine leads. That's an important concept, and that's what I think is important in love too. That have the feminine, which is the open, imaginative, reflective place where you need to spend a lot of time in and give it fullness, so then you can bring in the masculine the proper way. And the way that the Navajo look at masculine is that it comes in as a lightning bolt, and then it goes away. And you can, and one of the ways to express that is when women are carriers of all the babies, but what happens is they carry the eggs. That's the design of a human being is in those eggs. It's not in the sperm, but the sperm is needed to fertilize it. You know what I'm saying? You can't make any creation without masculine and feminine together, but the feminine is the dominant energy. It's important to put that properly because we don't get that in their culture. You know what I'm saying? We've forgotten about it. And so I think love has to be led by the heart, has to be led by the soul, has to be led by the feminine energy. Masculine is crucial to be in there. And again, don't see these energies as binary, strict, closed off, because that's not what they are. No indigenous person would say that. They are fluid. They are meant to be that way. Nature is that way. If you look at nature, you can see feminine, masculine all over the place, everywhere, and you can see it intertwined. You know what I'm saying? It's quite wondrous, the garden of life that nature is, but also the garden that we have inside with our imaginations. We have a wondrous garden there. Our imaginations are the most powerful thing we got in the world, and we could use it more and give it fullness, so that you can realize a great creation once you bring in the imagination in the powerful, expansive way it needs to be.
Listen, folks, raise your hands if you have questions for Louis J. Rodriguez. And as people are raising their hands, you could have just said, well, I'm a writer. I got a best-selling book. I've got 16 books. I'm teaching. I'm doing all these different things. What made you decide to open a bookstore, cultural center? I mean, that's a whole nother energy.
And I think that comes from the nurturing of, somebody mentioned that this is true in the Black community. It's true in the Mexican community, Puerto Ricans, and other communities, Native Americans. We do have to watch out for each other. We do have to care for each other. People tend to do that. Yes, there's so many relationships that are messed up, so much trauma. I get all that, but mostly even in the midst of so much trauma, people care for each other. So when I came from Chicago, I carried that spirit of the Chicago poetry slams and cultural spaces. And I lived in Puerto Rican neighborhood, Humboldt Park, which was actually Puerto Rican, Mexican, and African-American, and it was all mixed in there. We had a great community. I took that spirit to LA. And I went to a community that my wife grew up in, Pacoima, San Fernando Valley. You may not know, migrant community. It was Black and brown. In the 70s, it was majority Black. Has housing projects, has gangs, has every problem you can imagine. And we went there, and my wife was completely hurt that in who knows how many years that she had left, there was no cultural spaces, no bookstores. For 500,000 people, no art galleries, just like the miles and miles of our neighborhoods. You know what I mean? And we decided we need to fill that gap. We need to give back to community. Because there are artists, there are musicians. I found out that the lady that sold tamales was a great singer. I found out that the guy that used to serve us in the Italian restaurant was a great poet. I found out that the artists were sitting there with art all over the place in their garages, sitting there painting and painting. Nobody could see it. We gave them a space to be seen, to be heard, to be praised, and to be recognized, and also maybe make some money to make a living. You know what I'm saying? That's what the Juice is. That's why it's a multi-art, multi-comprehensive arts programming, even though it's also based on literacy and literature. We have a bookstore because we need to have bookstores in our barrios, in our ghettos, in our neighborhoods. We need to have them there. Libraries are great. Again, I all power to libraries, but we need to own books. We need to know we can own books. We need to know that we can have a book forever, and that's one of the things that I have introduced. And I'll tell you, when I first started 20 years ago, people were scared of showing up to the Chuchas. They had never seen a place like this. They would show up, look at the windows, women with their babies and their carriers, and just walk away. I remember when somebody walked in there because we had local artists up there, and they asked us, what's the price of the frame? They had never seen art being sold. They thought we were selling frames. You know what I'm saying?
Wow. Yeah.
We have to nurture our community to understand the power of the arts. And that's what we've done in this community for 20 years. And now it's loved and respected by everybody. We've expanded. And we want that concept to keep growing everywhere. Arts is transformative. Arts is essential. Arts are not just a frivolous, nice thing to do. It saved me when I was a troubled, heroin addicted, homeless kid in jails, and it can save anybody if you bring these resources right to their doorstep.
Some questions for you, Felicia, then Connie, then Monica. Felicia, and I'm going to ask folks, please, one question or one statement, one or the other, please, for the sake of time. Felicia.
Thank you. I love what you said about poverty having an impact on class, because that, I'm gonna narrow it down to one question. I heard you talking about the institution when you were incarcerated and the childhood. What support did you institutionalize that maybe led to some positive life? Because working with those who are incarcerated, have those childhood you to empower you to find your writing skills, to find your, I think, the writer's toolbox, the love toolbox.
Well, I think I heard the question. You were in and out, but what I think helped me again to have a connection with a meaningful, respectful adult, because that person was guiding me. He couldn't show up in the streets with me. He couldn't show up in the jails with me. He couldn't show up when we were shooting up heroin to help me, stop me. People think he showed up and pulled me out. No, but he gave me so much wisdom. You know what I'm saying? I think people that go through life, even people who've been in prison that hurt people, they got two choices. They either can curse the world from their pain, their traumas, their experiences, or they can bless. I encourage every one of these people to bless the world. I work with guys who have killed people. I work in high security prisons in California and other places. I've been all over the place. And I tell them the same thing. What are you going to do? Yes, you murdered somebody. Yes, you did this. You were a gang leader, whatever. Now, what are you going to do? Bless the world with your wisdom, your knowledge. So I had this young man teaching me, and he taught me enough so that it would be in my brain, because there was no recovery programs. There was no, like we have now, we have a lot of programming, good or bad, right or wrong. We have them. Then there was nothing, literally nothing. He had to imprint in my mind and in my soul what I needed to know to traverse and navigate that world where there was killings, where there was drugs, where there was the worst. I tell you, I saw people do things for heroin that nobody should ever have to see. And I know that's true for crystal meth, and it's true for fentanyl and everything that's gone through since then. But how do you traverse that? You need to be properly guided, properly given the love and support, a hand on your shoulder that may not be there literally, but is there all the time. You know what I mean? That's what a good mentor does. He's got that hand on the shoulder of these youth as they walk in the street and they make decisions. And there's a story in my first memoir where they were doing the PCP and putting them on marijuana. And I'd done it and everything, but I was always saying no, but we all lined up and they were passing this marijuana with PCP in it, the angel dust. And everybody took a toke, they passed it to me and I said no. And people looked at me, are you kidding me? I said no. And then everybody after me said no. I was really telling to me, people didn't really want to do this stuff. All it took was one person to say no, that they might say no. And I'm not trying to be like Nancy Reagan here, just say no to drugs. I'm just trying to say that when you begin to purposely change your life, it helps others think about their own purposes and the changes they have to make in their lives, but also in our society. That's what I think is important.
Connie?
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here and allowing us into your world for a little bit. I am currently writing a memoir, and listening to you is the first time I've really ever considered that there might be there might be multiple memoirs in my life. So the question is, how did you know when one memoir was finished and another one was ready to start? And I'm sorry, but it's a compound question. How did you take care of yourself when those emotions and those things came up when you had to talk about your traumas?
So the first thing is, memoirs really should be about one thing, one experience, one period of your life. They're not your memoirs. They're not autobiography. That's the whole life. You have to focus the memoir, whether it be your teenage, whether it be when you're writing life, whether it be when you're a mother or baby, whether having a baby, whatever the memoir is, focus it as much as you can so it doesn't become about a lot of things. But you can bring in a lot of stuff in there, but you still have to focus it. So that was important. Always running, I wrote as a grown man in my late 30s, but I wrote it about my teens. You know what I'm saying? So I focused it on that. But there's a lot of hindsight there, but it was still focused on that. Now, the other question is, it's so powerful. The thing about memoir is you gotta be as truthful as you can be to yourself. That's a hard thing to do. Memoir is not a fiction piece. Memoir is truth, but the difference is that unlike an accurate journalistic study, it's memory. And memory is faulty. You just gotta be as clear in your mind, and the reader is trusting that you will do this. Be as true as you can to that memory. Now, that doesn't mean everything is accurate. I point out that one time when I first met my wife now, I actually met her 10 years before we got married and became a couple. She was a friend of mine and very active with me for 10 years. I used to sell books out of my pantry. Again, I was about books even before I started to get YouTube. I would sell radical books out of the pantry in my kitchen in this ghetto barrio in Pasadena. It was a rough neighborhood. She came all the way from the valley because people from all over were coming in there to buy these radical books because you couldn't buy them in regular bookstores if they waited. And I met this beautiful lady. She shows up, and I could swear she had a brown pantsuit. I swear. She tells me she had a green dress. See what I'm saying? And I have to believe her because she wore the dress. So the accuracy isn't as important as that memory of seeing this woman coming in, her beautiful smile, beautiful face, her intelligence coming through. And I actually married somebody else, and my son, Ramiro, who's now 46, was 1 year old. And I remember he's standing up on his crib and looking at her and smiling. It's almost as if he knew that's going to be my stepmom many more years later. I mean, it was just the way that I saw that memory. You know what I'm trying to get at. The only thing I would say is this, because we're touching our heart things. Your family and your friends were going to get pissed off. I didn't realize my family was going to go nuts about always running. I didn't realize that half the gang was going to put me on, I even got, people were trying to put a contract on my head to the prisons because of always running. I don't talk about this very often. I don't mind saying it out, but many years removed. I got a call from somebody I knew from a maximum security prison I happen to know, and he says, dude, there's a word out that they're trying to put a contract on your head to the Mexican mafia in California. I had to tell him, listen, dude, don't do it. He said, what do you want me to do? Like, to stop it? I go, don't do nothing. Don't hurt nobody. Don't threaten nobody. Just leave it alone. I'm going to put my hands of spirit. I'm going to put my hands in the creator and say, I'm going to walk this world with peace, with healing, and with love. And if it means somebody's going to come after me, I can't control that. But I am not going to go after nobody. You know what I'm saying? And eventually I learned that members of my gang put a stop to it, because even though some of them didn't like me, I was still the homie. You know what I'm saying? They remember me, and I never got out of the gang. I never got jumped out. And I just left. There's another story about why I left. But the point is, they said, no, you can't mess with him. You know what I'm saying? And they were high up in the Mexican mafia. That helped me. But I'm just mentioning all this to point out it's dangerous ground, but it's the truth that has to come out. And the truth doesn't have to hurt. It has to be healing. When I talk about my dad molesting my sisters, that could be malicious, hurtful stuff. It isn't. It's truth that has to come out. And I will tell you one thing, my dad is not a monster. He's a hardworking Mexican migrant man, grew up in the terrible revolution where 1 million people died and 1 million people became refugees when the country only had like 15 million people, size of Guatemala today. That's a lot of pain. I can't explain why my dad is the way he is, but I will have to say that I still put him in the count. I still, I didn't leave him off the hook, but I didn't make him a monster. You understand what I'm saying? He's my dad, and I still love that fool. You know what I mean? And the story in that book was that my dad, when he was dying, he got stomach cancer. I was living in Chicago, and my mom was in LA, and she wanted me to talk to him the day he was going to die. And I said, I don't want to talk to him. She said, no, I'm going to put the phone to his ear. You have to. It's your last chance. Oh, man, she put the phone to the ear. So I thought I was going to curse him out. That was what I wanted to do, curse out my dad. Every terrible thing you can imagine. I couldn't do it. The only thing I could tell him was something he never told me. I love you, Dad.
Wow.
It's the only thing I could do. Mostly for me, but I know it was important for him. He needed a lot of healing. He never had it. That's the one thing I could do. And she said that he couldn't speak or nothing, but he showed it in his face showed it in motion, and then he died soon after. I had to do that, but mostly for me, because the hatred I had for my dad was so strong, I couldn't hold it no more. We have to be that way so that people know we're not here to hurt. I wasn't here to hurt my family. I put a lot of dirty laundry up there, but I told them I'm here to heal and help, not to hurt. Please understand. And eventually my family understood. It took them a long time. You can see. Now, I will talk to them ahead of time before I write any more about them, but at least they understood I needed to tell these stories, as painful as they were to have to see on paper.
Monica, then Matt, then Alejandra, then Lujira. That'll be the last four hands. So we're thinking about time. Monica, you all right?
Yes, liberated in many ways. My question kind of segues into what Connie mentioned in terms of your self-care. Do you find, or what was your experience going maybe back and forth between languages? You speak about your proficiency in English and in Spanish. I remember one time I was doing a NaNoWriMo project, and it was my mother's son memoir, which hasn't been published. I don't know if it ever will, but I did that for me more than anything else. And I got stuck in a particular piece where I had to admit of, being a birth mother. And a friend of mine said, write it in Spanish.
Mm.
And it was like the waterworks you're seeing now times 10, right? Because doing it in Spanish for me opened up a piece of my own consciousness that writing it in English just was not accessible. Did you experience that as well?
I didn't realize how much Spanish I had in my memoir. Yeah. I thought I only had 5 words. My publisher said, we're going to have to put a glossary. Go, why? It wasn't that many. There's so many Spanish words, because I found, as you're saying, maybe only in Spanish I could express these things. And that's what's good about having different languages, especially 2 languages. If I had my indigenous language, that would be even better, But being the 2 colonial languages, I had to be able to express it. And Spanish, as you know, has a different way to connect to the spirit, I think. And it is very emotive, and it is also very amazingly beautiful. I was listening to these Mexican ranchera songs. When I grew up, I didn't like ranchera songs. I was into the urban music. My mom would play them all night, all day long, and I was tired of them. I don't want, it was terrible. But now I've been listening for years now. Jose Alfredo Jimenez, Miguel Aceves Mejia, Lola Beltran. I'm listening, Juan Gabriel, when he was doing, and I'm listening to the lyric and their beauty of the words and how the language just swims through the rhythms and the way that they sing and that emotiveness. Spanish does something. It's not saying that English can't. I just think there's things that English does well and probably better, but in many ways the Spanish takes me to places the English couldn't. So I totally agree. I could only express certain things in the way that we expressed it in Spanish and or caló, which is the caliche, the slang, because we did a lot of that in the street. The caló is the street slang. And as you know, my glossary has a lot of the caló in there, street stuff that's got its own poetry. So I think that's true. And I think if we have 2 languages, you can do that. And I found that to be very powerful. The Spanish helped the English, and the English or whatever was missing in English helped me get back to the Spanish.
Matt?
I may have to do a glossary for my Dominicanismos in my memoir.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
Matt. Hey, Matt.
Hi. Hey, how you doing, Luis? I was wondering if you could tell us some more about, I know that the prison work you do, I know that you were coming out with an anthology, Make the Poem Cry. I was wondering if you could tell us more about that and where to find it.
Well, first I have to say that Matt Cedillo is one of the best important political, radical poets out there in LA, powerful, and you guys should look up his work. And he's also now doing the poetry workshops that I was doing at one of the high security prisons I was in. He's now taking it up himself. So I have to mention that. So Matt, thank you. The work that I did is I didn't want just to teach people writing and then walk away. I was giving them keys to liberation. You know what I'm saying? Because people say, well, you're an abolitionist, you don't like the carceral state. I get it. How can you justify going into prisons there? I go, because there's still human beings there and they need us to be there. The artists, the theater people, the thinkers, the philosophers, the writers, we need to be there. But I didn't want to just be there, just to be there, just to do something nice. The keys to liberation for me include getting close to the language that can speak what can't be spoken any other way. And the more that they do that, more powerful they become. And so I decided to do anthologies of the work from my class. I've done three or four of them. The last one was called Make a Poem Cry. And it comes from a line from one of the poets, one of the best poets I've ever seen, performance poet, who says that he couldn't see the tears coming from his eye, so he had to make the poem cry. Can you imagine? That was such a powerful line. And I use that to help get people to realize sometimes writing can carry you forth in the world in prison where showing an emotion could be deadly. You know what I mean? Its vulnerability is deadly, that you can still find a place to have an emotional life. That to me is important.
Louis, how old is that poem, Make a Poem Cry? Just out of curiosity, how far back does that go? Do you know?
Well, the guy, I think he might have wrote it around in one of my classes, and I think the class was in 2016. And I know that there's a hip hop song that has a similar
Jay-Z.
Yeah, that's right. So
Make the song cry.
Yeah. So I think that's where he got it from. You know, which I don't mind. You know, and then he ended up putting it in a poem. But when it comes to the poetry in the poem in the prison, it becomes very salient. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure what Jay-Z was doing was salient, but he just took that and it made so much sense. So I think he took it from the Jay-Z line, but he made it his own. You know how that goes.
Wow. Alejandra.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
I was just wondering how do you select the prisons that you visit, or are you there by invitation? How does that work? How did that come about?
Well, generally they invite me because I can't just show up in prison because most people don't want me in prisons, by the way. I'm pretty well known. My book is pretty well used. And by the way, my book is banned in the California prison system. It's kind of crazy. But I can show up, but I can't bring my book in. It doesn't mean these guys don't have it because they find a way to get the book. But so I'm pretty well known. So a lot of the prisons don't want me in there. They won't want people like Matt and us in there. But there are some, obviously it's a warden by warden, prison by prison situation where they do want me in. And they invite me. And people usually have programming there that invite me. So I've been going to prisons now for 40 years. I've been up and down state California, 18 different states. And because of my reputation, I've gone to prisons in Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Argentina, Italy, and England. Going to prisons in other parts of the world. But again, it's an invitation thing. I can't just step in their prison and say, I want to do a workshop here. They will close the door. But when I do show up, and it's getting, by the way, more interest in prisons for people like me to come in. I think the idea that people need programming, people need arts in the prisons is becoming a very important part of the work now, even though it's got a long ways to go.
Gyra.
Hi, first of all, thank you. It just your words made me think about something I'm working on for someone else, because I'm editing a book. There's supposed to be a memoir and it seems like a bio. And it's just making me think about how much I'm going to have to get this person to cut it down and be about specifics.
Right.
Because it's too grand, too large. But I do thank you for this. Your words were inspiring, and I'm glad to see that you've been doing work successfully for many years. And thank you for your time.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't know if we have too much time left, but I do want to at least leave you with some ideas of memoir prompts. Is that good? Just really quick.
Yes, please.
Because I think you guys should all think about writing on this. When I'm in the prisons, I got to come up with things that get these guys going because they really want to, but they don't know how to start. So I use all these metaphors. Metaphors are very important. I give them the metaphor, for example, of the crossroads. What crossroads have they been in? Are they in the crossroads now? Crossroads is when they have to choose which way they're going to go. They're caught between them, and sometimes they're caught in between the horns of a dilemma. That means either way you go, you're going to get hit by the horns. Talk about that. I'm talking about that dilemma, what it means. I also put them in a train, and in the train, I tell them your train is your life, but you're going to make 3 stops. It could be when you first went to school, when you first got to high school, when you first fell in love, when you first went to prison, whatever it was. Each stop, though, you're going to pick up baggage and drop off baggage. Tell me what you're dropping off and what you're picking up at each stop. This gets them thinking about their life. I have them think about the fogs in their life that have kept them from seeing clearly. Usually it's the rage fog, which I call the red fog, or the white fog, which is the numbing fog. These aren't racial terms, by the way. It's not red or black or anything. It's just skin color. It's about the fog. Or the black fog, which is the depressive, sometimes suicidal state. Whatever fog has blocked their way from moving forward. You know what I'm saying? A fog doesn't allow you to move very much. Sometimes you're stuck where you're at. Tell me about the fogs in your life. You know what I mean? I use all these metaphors to get them to express what their life is that could show up as a memoir or show up as a poem, show up as a personal essay. I also try to bring in stuff, mythological things like fate and destiny. People think fate and destiny mean the same thing, but they don't. I said fate is basically the cards you're dealt, the things you have no control over, that you're born a certain way, or a certain face, a certain skin color, whatever. You're born with these things. You didn't choose those things. But destiny is a destination that you have to make a choice for. Everybody has a destiny, but we're not all going to get there unless we choose to go that way. So I want them to know, when does fate and destiny collide? How does it work out in your life? How have things you have no choice over control what's happened, but how have other things happen that you have choice in come in? And so I've just given you some examples that could be helpful for anybody thinking about writing memoir, that can get them going, get them started. And the only thing I would just add is all life is really a spiral. And the spiral means that you elevate yourself through the spiral. But anything below that is nested. In other words, you don't really lose a lot of what you had as a kid. You might forget things, but it's all nested in you. As you mature, you get smarter and you get better about things, but you don't really lose everything you learned before. You know what I'm saying? People don't see it that way. They keep thinking they're compartments. And now I'm a teenager. Now I'm a young adult. Now I'm a mature person. You actually can draw from all the energies. Learn to draw from all of them, because that's what memoir is going to do. Go back to your childhood. Go back. Remember what it felt when you were 7 years old and your father walked in the living room and gave you a present, and it was the best day of your life. Remember when you saw the first person get killed, whatever it was, it's nested in you. Bring it out. And that adds to your maturity, your growth, and what I call the blessings that you can give in the world.
You've blessed us tonight. Thank you so much, Luis J. Rodriguez. I've been asking this question of every writer. I want to ask you the question as well as your last remark. What would you say now to that little boy that was you way back when?
I'll tell you something about that little boy. He was a sensitive kid, an imaginative kid. I used to love playing with my army men and my trucks. I didn't really like being out there in the street like my brothers and others. I was in my head. I had to let that go. because it wasn't manly to be that way. You know what I'm saying? To be sensitive. In our streets, unfortunately, we do dictate the kind of manhood you got to be. And I was dictated, that wasn't manly. I was beaten when I was 9 years old because somebody caught me playing dolls with my next door neighbor. I never thought twice about it. Playing dolls, we were imagining. I used to play dolls with my sister, but they saw me on the porch. I never lived it down. They beat me down. I was on the ground, bleeding. People told me to stay on the ground. People laughed at me. I was so humiliated. And I made a promise that day, which is not a good one, that I would never be on the ground ever again like that. And I kept that promise. And I stopped being that sensitive kid. And I became this really tough, I don't give a hoot kid. You know what I'm saying? I took on everybody. I took on everybody that messed with me. That's why I ended up in all these violent acts, attempted murder, murder's row, again, something I didn't do, but I was involved in a riot that led to that, as well as shooting at police officers and all these things that I would do. I was that raging, lost man. And men have to learn to get back to their sensitivities, have to learn to get back to what makes them human. I see so many men in these prisons that have the battle for them to get there, and they want to. They want to be a fuller human being. And that's what I had to learn. I wish I could tell that kid, don't lose your sensitivities. It took me a long, long time to get back to them. But because I have, now we have theatricals. Now I have all these books. Now I have this work in the prisons.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please, everyone, we got the links in the chat for the purchase his books, to support the bookstore, his bios there. We're also going to post it in our Facebook group. And we just really thank you so much for being a part of this tonight. You have blessed us. Can we unmute for a second? Just give a warm thank you to Louis J. Rodriguez, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
To Harlem, come to
I feel all the love. Thank you.
Sisters Uptown Bookstore. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel all the respect and love, and I wish you all the best. This is a great life, a writer's life. It is a hard life, but it's like my friend would say, pick your suffering. When you're not living the life you were meant to live, you're gonna suffer. You might as well suffer making that life happen.
Thank you. Yeah, so true.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Before we go, we're going to do our meditation. Remember, next week, we're going to have Miss Nikki Giovanni. She just actually literally texted me while you were speaking, Louis Rodriguez. Next week is Nikki Giovanni's joining us. And please know we're going to put the video up shortly on the Facebook group, Kevin Powell's Writing Workshop. Please don't forget Friday night. Friday Night Writes is a quiet space for folks to write. If you have, sometimes some of us have trouble writing. So it's the group that has been set up. It'll be posted on the Facebook page as well. And just thank y'all all. So let's, you blessed us. You said a lot. You gave me a lot to think about. I have a lot of notes right here. Thank you. In fact, I'm going to ask you, because one of the things that you said in your bio is that you're a healer. Any words of healing for us you want us to leave with tonight, Mr. Rodriguez?
Well, the one thing is really healing is about wholeness. And I know that because of all our traumas, we kind of go into the world fractured. We're not all put together. So I would say, try to have an integral life. Be whole. Go for the wholeness whenever you can, even if it's temporary, but keep going for that wholeness. Live intricately as much as you can.
Keep going for that wholeness. Let's just breathe in together one time, y'all. Just breathing through the nose. Let's just breathe in together. Let's just push it out. Keep going for the wholeness. Louis J. Rodriguez, keep going for the wholeness. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Y'all have a blessed night, everyone. See y'all next week.
Yes.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so
Peace.
much.
Thank you. Good night.